Hello and welcome to Gardener's World. With Monty away this week, Frances and I are in 500 acres of stunning scenery here at Wakehurst.
This is Kew's Wild Botanic Garden, affectionately known as Kew in the Country, and set in the beautiful High Weald of Sussex.
And we're incredibly excited to be able to be here for the next hour, exploring this wonderful location and, of course, bringing you plenty of gardening tips.
And don't worry, we still have jobs for the weekend, but more of that later on. Coming up on today's programme, an urban gardener celebrates both the wonderful and the weed.
And one visitor at one of the openings was trying to be helpful and went to and reached out, wanting to weed it out for me, and I had to run in and stop them from doing it.
We'll be meeting a man with an incredible array of houseplants.
My obsession with plants has led me to not only fill this part of my house with plants, but I converted my spare room into a greenhouse.
I'll be learning about the American prairie garden here to find out why conserving this endangered habitat is so vital, and discovering how to incorporate prairie plants into your garden.
And I am really excited because I've been granted special access to the world-famous Millennium Seed Bank, where I can learn about all the pioneering work that they're doing and get some tips about how us gardeners can collect, store and then reuse our own seeds.
The way I'd describe Wakehurst is an opportunity to see plants from all over the world in one place. You've got gardens, lush meadows, ancient woodland, all managed in a way to work with nature to increase biodiversity. But there's a huge amount of research being done here to help us better understand our natural environment, and that can only benefit us in our own gardens. Here to tell me more is Ian Parkinson, Living Collection and Conservation Manager. Ian, I know that there's more to Wakehurst than meets the eye.
Yes, I think the secret lies in this wonderfully diverse landscape. Fantastic place to garden, really wonderful growing conditions, high rainfall, unusual for the southeast of England, ravines and steep-sided valleys, and this creates very sheltered conditions, a very benign environment. And that enables us to grow plants from, well, all over the world.
And I've noticed as I've sort of been going around that you lay out by country and zone.
That's right. A walk around, we think, is like experiencing a walk around the temperate woodlands of the world. So 1 minute you can be walking up a mountainside in Chile, surrounded by monkey puzzles and southern beaches. And a short walk later you can be in the forests of North America, amongst the redwoods and hickories and hemlocks. So it's that real diversity that we think makes it so special.
I know we can all be a bit concerned about having wild areas in our garden, but how do you manage that here?
We do manage it. These landscapes have been managed for many, many centuries. What we try to do here is work with plant communities. So we bring together plants that would grow normally in that natural environment. And I think by doing that, they're far more resilient.
I agree.
One of Wakehurst's guiding principles is looking at what's happening in nature and then trying to replicate that in our gardens. And if you want just one thing to copy, then I absolutely love this meadow. Just look at the huge diverse range of plants growing here. Beautiful bright yellow buttercups with red clovers, sorrels, there's knapweed, there's lesser plantain, all coming into flower, and then beautiful grasses too. It's absolutely stunning. As a gardener, it can be tempting to hoik out any plant that you feel doesn't belong in your garden, whether it's a wildflower or an interloper. But for garden designer Jack Wallington in his garden in Clapham, all plants, even weeds, are positively welcome.
The whole point of this garden for me was an experiment to try as many different plants as I possibly could in a small urban space, in shade and in sun, including a couple of weeds. My name's Jack Wallington, I'm a landscape garden designer, and this is my little patio garden in London. It's about 36 metres square. Our garden's in the heart of London. It's surrounded by buildings. It's east-facing, so it gets the sun in the morning and it gets absolutely roasted up until about lunchtime. And then the sun moves behind the buildings and the garden's in full shade for the rest of the afternoon. So it's a really unusual mix of climates. Within the garden, the plants that give it real tropical vibes are the different bananas, including a red banana, Ensete morellii. Salvias as well, so I grow lots of different brightly coloured salvias. And also lots of dahlias. I grow lots of different brightly coloured dahlias in different shapes. Dahlias, we're told, need to be grown in full sun, but actually they will grow in part shade and they still flower perfectly. They grow a bit taller, and so they do need propping up, but they still grow. Previously, I'd been growing everything in pots because when we moved in, the entire garden was paved, and so I just bought large pots, and over the years that collection got bigger and bigger and bigger until I had hundreds of pots. And I just had this realisation last year when I was watering every single night these pots, why am I doing this? And so this year we just lifted all of the paving and planted everything in the ground, and thank goodness I did that because it just saved me so much time and the plants are happier. One of the real benefits of tropical gardens is at the beginning of the year, they start off very small and then they grow and grow and grow until now, when at the end of the season, when they're above head height. The plant's doing really good work in the foliage department in our garden. Plants like Colocasia pink china, which is a hardy colocasia with huge elephant ear leaves. And then I've got a huge collection of about 50 to 60 different species of ferns dotted all around the garden. What I really love about ferns is that they come in such a variety of shapes and textures. So some leaves are really dense and very solid, and others are really soft and see-through and transparent, and they've got all different shapes. Weeds have got bad PR, they've got bad press. In gardens, there's this unspoken scale where you have weeds on one hand, the worst, like Japanese knotweed at the far end, and on the other hand you have ornamental plants and wildflowers, which for some reason we decided we liked them. And in the middle, I just noticed there was a group of weeds which were as attractive as the ornamental plants, but for some reason were being lumped with the bad weeds. So I started bringing some weeds into the garden and allowing them to grow with all the tropical plants. One of my absolute favourite weeds is Herb Robert, Geranium robertianum. Lovely ferny foliage, lovely pink flower, and it goes on for months. It grows in a really deep, dry shade. It's a really problematic area, but looks really pretty. It's a really useful, weedy plant. It's a native plant, and while lots of exotic, non-native plants are beneficial to wildlife, it's good to have as many native plants as you can, because there are certain insects which only feed on certain native plants. So it's good to have a mix. This is actually a weed. This is Euphorbia laphyris, the caper spurge, and it's related to all of the other euphorbias we grow in our gardens. We opened our garden on a National Garden Scheme, and one visitor at one of the openings was trying to be helpful and reached out, wanting to weed it out for me, and I had to run in and stop them from doing it to explain that I really wanted it there, and they were warning me that it would spread around. I was like, no, that's exactly what I want to happen. And that I saw it not as a weed, but as a really useful plant dotted all around the garden, helping to hold everything together. They weren't convinced, but it's still here. If there's a weed that you particularly like, but you're a little bit nervous about introducing it into your garden, the best way to start is by growing it in a pot. It's one of the easiest ways of containing a weed. I grow yellow corydalis in a pot, really bright yellow flowers, and its foliage looks really lush and green all the time. I never ever water it. It just sits there almost all through the winter as well. One of the really brilliant things about weeds is that they flower for an amazingly long period of time, and they're also really low maintenance. So they look after themselves. Lots of them, like red dead nettle, can also spread politely without taking over, and the bumblebees really love it. Campanula, the blue bellflower, will also scramble over rocks and into gravel, as well as beds, so it's really useful. And by planting weeds, it actually stops other unwanted weeds from getting in. Growing weeds has been an experiment. There'll be some successes and some failures, but actually I'm so glad I started doing it because it opened up an entire range of free plants, which are amazing, really good for sustainable reasons for wildlife, and they just look really beautiful.
I think what Jack's done there is actually quite brave, and I love the idea of growing weeds in pots, especially when they're good for the insects. Now, we've had a lot of rain recently, so luckily, or not, depending on your opinion, there should be plenty of weeds in your garden. Here at Wakehurst, they're running a project looking at how to actively encourage predators into our gardens. Now stick with me, because I know as gardeners we often struggle with pests that we don't want. But I want to change your mind about how we think about the creatures and beasties that live in our gardens, because they are all vital. Our gardens are an ecosystem in which all these creatures play a part, and they can be a natural army that will keep everything in balance. But first, they need the right habitat. Without that, they simply won't come in. Here to tell me more about his research is Tom France, who is studying conservation biology and has set up numerous experiments across the meadow and the surrounding agricultural areas. So what are you doing here, Tom?
So I'm using a dwarf variety of broad beans over here, and on each plant I've placed 20 pea aphids. And I'm going to leave these plants out in the field for around a week, then return, take them back to the lab, and hopefully, not for the aphids, unfortunately, many of them will have been parasitized by parasitic wasps. A parasitic wasp will lay its egg inside an aphid, the egg will then hatch, and the larvae will then slowly eat the aphid inside, killing the aphid. Yeah, it's very gruesome. And then the parasitic wasp will then hatch outside of the aphid, and the whole cycle of parasitism will begin again.
But the key is that that's a natural process in nature.
Yeah, exactly.
And to encourage some of that will mean that you will still have some aphids that survive, but crucially, you'll never have too many aphids that will then decimate your crops.
Yeah.
And so in a garden setting, can we replicate this?
Of course, so you can bring natural pest regulation to the garden. There's many different beneficial insects that you can attract to your garden, so many predatory insects groups such as ladybirds, lacewings, hoverflies, spiders and beetles, as well as many parasitic wasps.
And what's the key to having as many of them as you possibly can?
Diversity is the key in your garden. So you want flowers flowering all season long at different times. So you've always got plants flowering, and that will maintain a diverse community of beneficial insects in your garden. To attract parasitic wasps, in particular, you want flowers with many inflorescences, so lots of tiny little flowers and exposed nectaries. So flower families such as daisies, yarrows and mallows are really good, as well as herbs, so mint, thyme, rosemary are also fantastic for attracting parasitic wasps.
So there are a lot of actual garden plants that people are really familiar with, and the nice thing is they'll bring in bees, which we seem to accept as gardeners, but also have that extra benefit.
Exactly.
It's quite easy to achieve, really.
Yeah, well, it can take time, and a good point is to, be patient and really resist using those pesticides in your garden.
Because pesticides never really target one species.
Exactly.
They will just wipe out every single insect.
So it's not just the pest species they'll wipe out, they'll take all of your beneficials away as well.
Amazing. Well, I hope for your sake, if not for the aphids, that you have some good results and lots of predation going on your broad beans. Sounds good.
Thank you.
When you're choosing plants for your garden, as well as going for something beautiful, think about the wildlife that those plants will attract too. You can have stunning flowers and plants that also work hard to support predators, who in turn will help keep the pest populations down. I've chosen a simple recipe of plants that are going to look great, but also attract hoverflies, bees, and a host of other insects. These two containers here are right next to a little couple of wigwams of climbing French beans, which are very susceptible to attacks from pests particularly aphids. So I'm hoping that by filling these with flowers, that will keep those pests at bay. And I'm just starting with these oxeye daisies or leucanthemums. They're absolutely lovely, they're perennial, and they're fantastic for bringing in pollinators of all kinds, especially predatory ones. And adding to that, I have included some lovely Achillea, 2 different kinds. Both of the Achillea will have the same flower shape. You can see it forming here. And it's that flat flower with an inflorescence of lots of little flowers, which will attract predatory wasps and hoverflies and all different kinds of pollinating insects. Even though I have 2 containers here, I'm treating this whole thing as one display, almost like a border. It just goes to show that even if you don't have a whole area to put aside to meadow, you still can create that lovely diverse habitat for insects. This is fennel. Now, fennel is obviously a herb, so you can eat it too, which I always think is quite nice for a companion plant to be edible and useful in its own right, as well as serving a purpose in the rest of the kitchen garden. But the flowers of fennel have that similar shape to the yarrow, and they attract hoverflies by the thousand. And when they turn to seeds, they're also really delicious as well. There. So I'm just going to use 2, because even though they are small now, they can get about 4 or 5 foot high. There. So we have the basic framework of perennials, and now I'm going to add some colour for this season, which will come in the form of a sunflower. You can't get more cheery than a sunflower. This one's a dwarf one, so it won't get 12 feet high like some can. There we go. You'll see that I'm really cramming all of these in, but that's because a lot of these plants are annuals, so it doesn't matter if they're too close together this year. The perennials, though, are nicely spaced, so they'll bulk up and take over the container in years to come. There. I think that looks really, really nice, and I can already see hoverflies buzzing around as I'm planting them. So hopefully all the ladybirds and lacewings and wasps and the butterflies and the bees will all come here and be attracted to this for the rest of the summer.
We all pursue our own passions in our own gardens, and for some of us it's about grow your own. For Polly Holmes in Wrexham, she's not just about the aesthetic, she's also about the taste.
Hello Gardener's World, welcome to my mixed weather day here in beautiful North Wales. We moved here 7 years ago and set about turning a lawn into a kitchen garden.
Somebody's very happy in the garden. So we've actually got 6 raised beds, 4 of which we have on rotation, 2 with permanent crops of asparagus and raspberries. This is the bean bed this year, which has got some parsley that's going a bit crazy. These broad beans are crimson with the beautiful red flowers on, which are worth growing just for the flowers. This has got garlic and the last of the purple sprouting broccoli. And over there we've got some rhubarb, blueberry bush, and our prized fig that looks like it's going to produce lots of figs this year. This is the greenhouse, which now at this time of year is getting very busy with seedlings and tomato plants and pak choys that we tend to use as salad. But what I really want to show is my prize crop of carrots, because I can't bear the idea that the greenhouse just stays empty all winter. And somebody said, try growing carrots.
So the moment of truth. Oh. Not the longest carrot in the world, but not bad.
I can say that the carrots tasted absolutely delicious, and we will definitely be growing them again in the winter. So at the weekend we just dug the last few out. Wasn't a bad crop really. And then we dug the compost out, which we do every couple of years, and replaced it with fresh, ready to go for this season.
I really like what Polly's done. I think she's brave, taking up her lawn and giving it over to productive space. I really love those carrots. This is a North American prairie, or at least it will be. It's still in its infancy. It's only 3 years old. To see an American prairie, you'd need to travel to North America, but it's unlikely you'll happen upon one because sadly, they are now extremely rare. Only 1% of these incredibly species-rich ecosystems remain because of changes in land use and commercial farming. Wakehurst's work to protect such precious habitats has led them to nurture their own. Joe Wenham is in charge of this pioneering conservation project. What is it about the conditions here at Wakehurst that should potentially make these successful?
A lot of our soils are similar to those you would find in a traditional prairie out in North America, but also the moisture and the rainfall that we have here and the climatic conditions really match those climatic conditions out in the US.
In 2019, a small research team had special permission to go out to North America and collect seeds to bring back and start 3 distinct kinds of prairie right here in Sussex.
We sowed into the landscape mixes of seed, one from the Atlantic coastal plain, which stretches from Virginia down to Florida, one from the South Central prairie, which is very much more a tall grass prairie that you would recognise, and then this area here is Willamette Puget Trough. Now, that's over on the west coast of America, and that's very much more a moisture retentive kind of ecosystem.
As a botanic garden, you're able to go out and collect seeds, but you know, if I wanted to be able to get some of these plants, are they available?
Yeah, particularly the areas in the tallgrass prairie. So a lot of those plants people already grow in their gardens. So you think of Coreopsis, you think of Rudbeckias and Black-eyed Susans, you think of Echinaceas. All of those are really widely available. But there's also some really unusual species in here, like mountain mint, which is actually edible and you can make tea from it.
Right. If I were to come back here in 5 years, Joe, what might this prairie look like?
Well, I would hope it would be super diverse. There's going to be some beautiful conservation species in here. I think you'll be able to come and walk through some beautiful tallgrass prairies, but also see the diversity of the species in the different areas and the different zones.
And that's really special, really, and it saves me going all the way to America.
Well, it does, but I'd recommend that as well.
I'm potting up these Liatris. This is Liatris aspera, which is very closely related to a very familiar plant, Liatris spicata, which we often grow in gardens, big tall flower spike. But this one is from the prairie land around Chicago. And there aren't many to be found. So as many as we can get growing healthily, the better. And the prairies around Chicago have very deep soils. So the key to growing these ones well, even when they're in containers, is using deep pots like these. So the roots can go down and get all the nutrients.
Oh, you're doing well there, Frances.
I know, isn't it nice to just be potting?
Absolutely, just the best job. And this is Spirobolus heterolepis, prairie drop seed. And what they're doing with these now is dividing them.
Okay.
And this is such a brilliant way of getting extra plant material.
I know, and people always think that you can maybe get 2, but actually with something like that, a tiny clump, you can get loads and loads and loads of propagation, so lots of free plants.
Definitely.
And there we go.
There we go. A little baby
whole
plant.
new Spirobolus.
There's going to be 3. There's a whole new one that's coming through.
And is it nice to think that these plants will go out into the prairie here, and in years to come, we'll just recreate that lovely habitat.
And I think the thing about, you know, growing from seed, doing this division, they're often much more robust. But this is the joyful part, I have to say. One of the phenomena of the last few years has been the increase in popularity of houseplants. And Tony Le Breton in Cheltenham has a Monstera collection that has become all-consuming.
Plants really bring joy to my life. I love waking up every day. I open my doors into this amazing space and it immediately just grounds me and gets me ready for the day. My love of gardening was instilled in me from a young age from my grandparents. And my nana had the most amazing garden which was packed full of flowers during the summer. So what I wanted to do is recreate a really immersive jungle feel inside my home. This was inspired by my time living out in Asia. And I wanted to just bring that into my home, the joy that I felt walking through the jungles and exploring all of these textures, shapes and colours of leaves. I really wanted to bring that into my space. The collection is made up, the majority are aroids, so a huge family of plants that actually are the most available family of plants for growing indoors in your home. So they're really easy to get a hold of. They have been specifically bred to live in our homes, so they're really easy to care for, and they thrive in this environment with the light. This is one of my favourite plants. It's Tradescantia flumensis variegata, and I was lucky enough to find a tiny little piece, no bigger than this, on the street in London, and I propagated it until I had enough pieces to fill this hanging basket. And I just let it spill all the way down. There's nothing in the middle, and the key with this is to keep cutting it hard back, which allows it to thicken up and give you this really beautiful tower of plants. Another one of my favourite specimens is this beautiful Alocasia zebrina, more commonly known as elephant ear because of these huge paddle-like leaves. It's a really easy plant to look after. Just keep it slightly on the damp side, plenty of bright indirect light, and it will thrive. Within my collection, the majority of the plants are from the genus Monstera. And many people know Monstera as the traditional Swiss cheese plant. Monstera are native to South America, and their range is absolutely vast. Fenestrations, or the holes or perforations in a Monstera's leaves, are widely debated. There are a lot of different ideas of why, one of which is that the fenestrations capture any beams of light coming through the canopy without actually having the solid leaf and all of that material for the plant to support. Monstera deliciosa is one of the easiest plants to propagate, and all you need to do is find a node on the stem, and this right here is a node. It's the little bump on the stem, and that's where new growth or roots can emerge from. You'll also notice there's actually an aerial root on here. Whether your cutting has an aerial root or not really doesn't make a difference. Cut about an inch underneath the node. Propagating is one of my favourite things to do. It's plants for free, and a lot of the plants around me are actually propagations from plants I've got from family or friends. Now, when I took the cuttings, I put them straight into some water with some fertiliser in there to keep them hydrated. And the first way you can propagate is just by leaving the Monstera inside there, and you can actually then watch the root growth form. I use a soil mix. This one is around 50% compost, about 30% bark chips, and about 20% vermiculite. You just take your compost, pop it in the pot about a third of the way, and you can see with this it has a long aerial root. Now, they can form roots underground, but I find it best to cut a little bit of that off because this material can cause rot. You want the node to be below the surface of the soil, and then just simply fill around it. And leave around an inch below the pot, which means that you can give it a good water without the water going everywhere. Now, all you need to do with that is pop it somewhere warm and bright, and within a couple of weeks you should see some new growth forming. My preferred method of propagation, and that is in sphagnum moss. I use live sphagnum moss, which is collected under license here in the UK, and it is completely sustainable. And this has been pre-soaked in water with some houseplant fertiliser in there as well. And the reason I like to use sphagnum is because it creates a really beautiful, warm, humid environment in the pot, but still allows a lot of airflow through. This aerial root is an okay length, so I'm going to just make a little well in the middle of the moss. You basically want it firm enough to keep the cutting upright, but still allow the air to pass through. And you can give that one a little water. Again, pop it somewhere bright and warm. And the key with this one is to put it somewhere humid. And within a week or so, you'll see some new growth out of that one. My obsession with plants has led me to not only fill this part of my house with plants, but I wanted to give my Monstera the best possible atmosphere to grow in. So I converted my spare room into a greenhouse. This allows me just to create the most perfect environment for some of my rarer plants. This is my Rhaphidophora tetrasperma variegata, which is one of the rarest plants in my collection. And this beautiful pattern that you see is a genetic mutation which happens at random, which is why it is so incredibly rare. And one of my other favourites is this one here, Monstera sp. Bolivia. It was found in a collection in Austria. I love the really heavy fenestrations it has. When the leaves emerge, they're really soft and pliable, and then they harden to something like this. It will climb all the way to the top of here, and I'm aiming to get it as mature as possible. The next step for me is to create a bigger greenhouse to allow me to grow my Monstera to more maturity, and also just to allow me to have multiples of the same plant. My collection has grown hugely over the last couple of years, and I love to share it with people, and if I can just inspire one more person to find that excitement that I feel in gardening, then I'm happy.
Tony's Monstera collection looks amazing, and it puts the one I've got to shame. Houseplants can look great all year round if they're looked after. But when it comes to the garden, it's something that us as gardeners really struggle with, making every season look fantastic. But over there is the winter garden, and it is looking brilliant now. Francis Annette designed this charming space. Francis.
Hi.
I have to give you credit for this. I can't believe it's a winter garden. It looks amazing.
Yeah, no, thank you very much indeed. So what we're doing, this is a lovely winter heather, lovely flowering. It's just going over now. So we're just going to give it a light trim, something like that, just to keep them nice and compact and make sure that we've got a good show for this coming winter.
So when you put this garden together, I mean, yes, winter is the main season, but how do you keep it looking good all year round?
For me, what I wanted, although you had all that lovely vibrant colour and smell, of course, because they're the two principal things for a winter garden, to have those and then to have that wonderful sensory overload that you have at winter, but then in summer to have the antithesis of this and have something which was green and lush, soothing, calming. And then when I thought about an autumn and a spring, what I wanted to make sure is that there were some little tokens of colour, but nothing that was going to overrich everything, because it was winter when it does its absolute display.
We can sometimes get a bit sort of het up about wanting there to be colour punch all the time.
Yeah.
So that's quite interesting that you sort of say that there's accents of colour.
Yeah, that's right.
And I guess also to get a really good winter garden, like now, it's that preparation, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yeah. Spring is actually quite a busy time for a winter garden, because we've had that wonderful period where we've just let the winter garden be, allow people to enjoy it, and then as we're coming out of winter and into early spring, we need to make sure that we're cutting down the cornus and the salix, because we want them to make lovely, rich new stems for the winter, and we'll be doing stuff like this as well. Trimming down the heathers, making sure that everything is going to be absolutely pitch perfect for later in the winter.
Francis, what are the sort of plants that you like to use?
I really want something that's bright and colourful. That's something that's going to loom out on a cold winter's day. And for me, that has to be Cornus. There's a red one called Cornus alba siberica, and it has these lovely bright red carmine stems, and they really do stand out. But for fragrance, I would probably look at Hamamelis. They have such a wonderful smell. It's something that really does awaken your senses during the winter.
Oh, actually, as I'm looking up, seeing the grasses under the birch, because you've got this is very static.
Yeah.
But there's movement, isn't there, in those grasses as well? And the way the light catches it, that also gives interest.
Yeah, and that's right. And that's one thing that I think as a quality of a winter garden, or a garden, any garden really for that matter, is sound. Because sound can play such an important role, whether it's the breeze in the trees, the rustle of the grasses. And also this grass that we have here is a Calamagrostis, so it gets very, very tall. It's about 2 metres high. And it has a beautiful swaying motion when there's just a breeze coming through the winter garden. Yeah. It's great.
Well, I'm sold. I was always thinking, yeah, winter gardens, which are great when you see them, and I probably only went in winter.
Right, OK.
So I've been caught out.
Yeah, here's the opportunity to come and see the garden at all times of the year.
Well, that's the thing. A garden is for all seasons.
Yes, indeed.
There you go.
Still to come, I'll be stepping into the Millennium Seed Bank, the most biodiverse place on the planet, and meeting the people who keep the world's seeds safe.
You've got between 15 and 20% of the total world's flora.
So still plenty of work to do.
So there's plenty of collecting work still to be done.
And ARIT is tackling the perennial problem of gaps in the borders at this time of the year.
But first, we have another one of your fabulous gardens. And this one's from Mona Abound in London. And she has the National Collection of Carokia, a fantastic plant from New Zealand.
Hello, I'm Mona, and welcome to my garden. This is the blank canvas I started with in 2000, and it's taken me 20 years to turn it into what you see now. From New Zealand, I acquired my first Carokia, which became my passion. Today, I am proud to be the national collection holder of this versatile plant. Now that box has been decimated throughout Europe, Carokia has proved itself as the perfect alternative, as it can be topiarized and has the advantage of producing flowers and berries, and in some cases turning a beautiful bronze in winter. My garden plays host to many other unusual New Zealand plants, including Pseudopanax, of which I have 13 different varieties. The color theme that runs throughout the garden is blue-grey, contrasting yet complementing purple bronze. This is my haven. While I'm here, I don't think about anything else. The pruning is my favorite job in the garden because that's my opportunity to sculpt plants. When I'm not gardening, I play the bass clarinet in an amateur orchestra. This garden was a labor of love which has taken me 20 years, and it's taken a lot of material, a lot of sweat, blood and tears in order to give these plants what they required to thrive.
Mona's collection is fantastic, and how amazing that we can grow plants from all over the world in our gardens. We're actually really lucky here in the UK because our climate gives us a whole range of different growing opportunities. Now this is somewhere I have wanted to come for years. I have the privilege of standing in the world-famous Millennium Seed Bank, and get this, it is the most biodiverse place on the planet, and that's pretty exciting. Here to tell me more is Ted Chapman, who is the UK Conservation Partnerships Coordinator. So Ted, tell me about the Millennium Seed Bank and what it does.
We're the world's largest wild seed bank. So we collect wild plants and seed from around the world. We bring it here, we store it in our -20 vaults, located under the ground, where the seed should survive for decades or centuries, hopefully.
That's amazing. So the cold temperatures is what will preserve them for as long as possible.
Yeah, so the first thing we do is to dry the seed down. So most of the seeds in this country particularly are orthodox. We can dry them, put them in the cold store, and they will last a long time.
And what is the purpose of keeping all these seeds? What's the aim of the project?
Well, I guess kind of at the most fundamental level, if we can collect the seed and keep it safe here, then we've protected that population or that species from extinction. But for us, the seed collections are much more than that. They're a resource for research. We can help people understand how to conserve these species for the future.
Should diseases like Xylella wipe out every single Mediterranean plant on the face of the earth, this is where we would turn to get seeds to repopulate those habitats. And how do you go about collecting seeds? And then once you've collected them, what's the process they have to go through before they arrive in one of these vaults?
When we're going out into the wild to collect a seed, what we're trying to do is capture the diversity of that population. So we want to sample seed from lots of individuals from across the population to get the big ones, the little ones, that natural variation that we see in wild plants. So the sampling is really, really important. I mean, just for example, some seeds are very, very tiny, and we would store them here in little vials, in little bottles, in big jars like this.
Wow.
You know, some seeds, like our native orchid seed, for example, almost dust-like, tiny seeds. Little seeds, of course, don't take up much space, and this is another example of a sort of quite a chunky seed. It's a relative of the mallow from Madagascar.
Okay, wow.
So that's quite a big seed, which we put in. These are just ordinary preserving jars, but they provide a really neat hermetic seal, which of course is what we need to keep our seed nice and dry. And then we kind of have a extreme example here, which this is the Coco de Mer, which is the largest seed in the world, which as you can see is absolutely
amazing,
enormous. Now this is an example of a seed that we couldn't store in our seed bank. You couldn't dry this. It dies once it becomes dry.
Right.
But well adapted, as you can see, to float from island to island.
Which is why it's such a varied and global species, isn't it? But hopefully because of that adaptation, it's not under any kind of conservation problems because it has a huge genetic diversity around the world? Or would you still like to try and find a way to store that as well?
Well, this would, I guess, would be the ultimate seed conservation challenge.
Yes.
Would be finding out how you store something like this.
Do you know what proportion you have at the moment of the known species?
Well, of course, new species are being found all the time, so it's a kind of shifting target. We've got about 45,000 species here. Across about 96,000 individual seed collections.
Wow.
So it's a lot of seed. It's about 2.3 billion individual seeds.
Wow.
It's probably between 15 and 20% of the total world's flora.
So still plenty of work to do.
So there's plenty of collecting work still to be done.
So if people are gardening at home and want to be more sustainable and save money and save their own seeds, is there a kind of general rule for success with that?
I guess there are three things I'd be thinking about there. Harvest them at the right time. So that's the point at which they would be almost dropping or naturally dispersing from the plant. That's nature telling you the seed is mature and ready to go.
Yeah.
Spread your seed out so it's not in a lump on newspaper or an absorbent material, and just let it dry naturally somewhere cool and keep it cool. You don't have to put your seed in the freezer, and it's probably not a good idea to do that unless you know it's really, really dry.
Yes.
But dry the seed, keep it cool, and of course label it. Really important, so
Absolutely.
you don't forget what it is.
And then when you've sown it, label it again.
Yeah, keep on labeling.
Growing plants from seed is, of course, a lot cheaper than buying mature plants, which means we can all be a bit more experimental with what we grow. So this seemed like a good time to revisit Sid Hill down in Cornwall. Growing plants from seed has allowed him to grow ornamentals and edibles together, which has become the backbone of his gardens.
I had a bit of a different upbringing. I was home educated and I actually travelled Europe as a child, and then my dad bought a small holding in Portugal and we had 7 acres. So instead of going to school and learning about academic subjects, I was taught how to grow my own food. I was given my first vegetable garden at 10. We were growing food ecologically, and what that means is we were growing across the landscape with diverse plants growing together. When people came to see it, if they didn't understand that this was a food-producing system, they would have just seen it as a field of weeds. And I saw that there was a missing link here. There was these really productive gardens, and then there was these botanical gardens which have this wow factor. I saw there being an opportunity to design these seed mixes to be able to create really diverse, abundant herbaceous plantings at low cost from seed, but incorporating edible plants from around the world. This meadow I only sowed 3 months ago, and it's already looking beautiful, and there's loads to eat. In this meadow, there are 30 different edible species. Right now, I'm picking some sorrel, which is on the ground cover layer. It's got quite large leaves, which covers the ground around it, and it doesn't mind a little bit of shade. It has a really nice sour taste and it adds flavour to a salad. This one here is chrysanthemum greens, which is an annual. Adds really beautiful colour to the meadow in the first year, but the leaves have a really nice taste. It's lovely. 3 key tips for a successful meadow are buying quality seed from a reliable source, preparing the ground and making sure there's no competitive weeds from the beginning, and looking after your meadow into the future, weeding out any undesirable species and making sure you water in dry weather. There we have it. Here's a fresh salad ready for our lunch, picked from the edible meadow. Plants are social beings. They grow in close-knit communities together. If you look at a woodland, a meadow, a hedgerow, you'll find plants interwoven together and growing and thriving. So in my gardens, I look at natural plant communities and I mimic that structure, but each layer of the planting is either an edible or useful plant, or it's there for its beauty. Much of the time when we're creating gardens, they're really just a feature on the landscape, just to look purely ornamental. And I think horticulture is moving away from that now. And what inspires me is creating these gardens that not only look beautiful, but they produce food, they are biodiverse, gardens that are maximising the benefits they can provide and securing a sustainable future.
That meadow is absolutely stunning, and I'd love to try some of that edible salad. Now, this is the wall garden, and it is packed full of plants that are doing their thing in June, really going for it. Full of amazing plants that you'd recognise in your own gardens. So that means it needs a lot of work, and thankfully there are a lot of volunteers on site to help.
A nice job for a spring morning, isn't it?
Oh, lovely.
Has it been very wet here lately? What have you been having to do because of the weather?
Sorting out the dahlias, covering them back.
Because I can see some dahlias coming up in here, so obviously a lot of them are left in the beds.
Yeah, we experimented this year. We took some in into the greenhouse, and the rest we left out and covered them up with leaves and compost.
Right.
Yeah, they seem to be okay. They've come back.
That's amazing, even in this cold winter we just had.
And it's sheltered in here, so it's about 4 degrees, 3 degrees warmer than outside.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good, thank you.
You look so busy.
Yeah.
What's going on in here then?
Well, these are the helichrysums we're just planting, the microphyllums, which will be lovely and spread through the whole border.
Yeah.
And then in amongst them, there's some huge onpodiums and loads going on.
It's such a gorgeous border. I love that colour. That glaucous colour's kind of picking up the Nepeta, isn't it?
It's
there?
beautiful, and this lavender as well, and then all the purples and... Oh, what
no
a place to be, isn't it?
Can I help? Can I help?
Oh, actually, yeah, there's some plants up on the corner there that you could stick in the ground.
Good, I should get on with those. I'll see you in a bit.
See you soon.
Good to see a knee pad. Got dodgy old knees, me. So let's get in here. Okay. Do you know what? I've always dreamed of having a walled garden, so to be here is a complete treat, actually. Now I'm going to have a look and see what plants I've been given. Penstemon and a verbena. I really like the way this has been set out because I can see that there are dahlias coming through, and I think these penstemons are going to kind of thread through, start to come up until the dahlias come up a little bit later. And the thing about penstemons that I really love is that they have great colour, they can really fill a border, but they can be a little bit temperamental, but I know that this Burford seedling is a bit more robust, and I think that's a really good choice in this space. Penstemons like to be sun-baked, and they do have to have free draining soil. So I'm just going to get this one in here. Very nice soil, I have to say. They obviously really look after these borders. Just digging out enough to get pot in. That's about right. Oh, and look at that lovely root system. Little T's on there just to stimulate the root growth. Pop him in. And backfill. And that's great. Penstemons, leave about 45 centimetre spacing in between them. They kind of bush up quite well. And the very good thing about them, to prolong flowering, when you've got penstemons through the borders, maybe every other one, chop back by half so that this one will flower earlier, then this one will flower, and that way you're going to get a lot more value out of these plants. This is Verbena La France. It's tender, so should be treated as an annual. And it's very good at acting as ground cover because it doesn't get too high. So whilst waiting for the dahlias to come up, it means it will give this some nice coverage. It likes to be in the sun and a free draining soil again. And seeing the roots coming through this one, it's ready to go in and start doing its job. These verbenas, they're such good doers because they're mound forming. So they get to about sort of 50 centimetre mound, and they're prolific in their flowering. A lovely purple haze really that's going to spread through this border. And it's a really, really good way actually of making sure that you've got your ground covered at all times until your major perennials come through. I can already start imagining this border, these lovely mounds of verbena nestling against the penstemon. And I can see dotted around as well, apart from the dahlias, there's geraniums. They are creating a long flowering border here, and that's something that's really lovely to be able to do at home. You want to see flowers coming out all the time. And it is at this time of year where there are so many jobs to do. And for one of our viewers, Vanessa, it's all about her tomatoes.
Hello everyone, my name is Vanessa, and as you can hear, I am not from Great Britain. I am from the teeny tiny country of Luxembourg, and as most people live here, I love the British gardening spirit and especially BBC Gardener's World. And today I'm going to give you a little tip on how you can help your friends during these hard times.
Due to the lockdown situation that we also have here in Luxembourg, I had friends and family telling me that they couldn't get any tomato seedlings. So I thought maybe I could help them because I have lots of tomato plants. I don't have any spare ones, but I can multiply them, and here's how you do it. So, if you have tomatoes at some point, you will have to take care of them and pinch out those little side shoots like this one. They're small, it's pretty easy, but sometimes we forget to do it and sometimes we don't see them directly, and they can grow up to be like this big. So actually that's a whole new plant. As soon as you found a shoot that is about this size at least, you can just take it and put it into water, and after a few days you will see that there will be lots of roots that have formed, and then it's pretty easy. You just take a little pot or whatever you have and you put it into soil, and voila, you have a little tomato plant that you can give to somebody as a gift. So thanks for listening to me. I hope my English was not too bad. I hope you all stay well and safe. Thank you very much.
I love Vanessa's idea for taking cuttings, and I've never tried that myself, so this year I'll be doing just the same thing with my tomatoes. Now I'm getting stuck in here in the walled garden, but there is still a lot to do, and here are some things that you can get on with this weekend. If you planted a green manure last autumn, now is a great time to cut it back and dig it in. Green manures are hard-working crops that cover the ground in winter. That stops weeds taking over and provides cover for wildlife. By digging them in now, you put goodness back into the soil and add organic matter to make your beds perfect for your plants all year. If you haven't tried them, why not give them a go?
If you have a young tree in your garden, it will really benefit from a layer of mulch right now. Make sure you water the tree well first, then cover the area under the tree with a mulch such as peat-free compost to roughly 5 centimetres deep. Keep the mulch away from the base of the stem and you'll have prepared your tree well for the season ahead.
As the weather is warming up, it's a good time to take heel cuttings from Mediterranean plants like this lavender. Take a non-flowering shoot and peel it from the stem, leaving a small heel. Trim it down and remove any lower growth. Insert 2/3 of the cutting into a pot filled with free draining compost. Water well and put somewhere warm to root. Well, I hope that's helped you with your jobs for the weekend, but I suspect that here it might be more like jobs for the year, do you think?
Well, with 500 acres, they are going to be pretty busy.
I think so. But you know, I've absolutely loved chatting to people here and finding out all about the research and the conservation work they're doing.
Well, what I found amazing is that in such a big space, they've created these mini garden spaces, so you've got plenty of ideas to take home for your own space.
Absolutely. But that's all we have time for this week. It has been great spending time here at Wakehurst, though.
And next week, Monty is back at Longmeadow, so we'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye.